At WFM Labs, our organization recognizes the importance of gaining market insights to compete effectively and provide better goods and services to our customers. However, exchanging price or commercially sensitive information with competitors can violate antitrust laws and harm competition. To avoid antitrust risk, it is essential to ensure that information exchanges in the WFM Labs community are reasonable and promote competition. This includes avoiding discussions or coordination of sensitive topics such as customer prices, pricing paid to vendors, compensation paid to employees, or proprietary information. If you would like more information, please refer to the guidelines outlined by the FTC and DOJ, Antitrust Guidelines for Collaborations Among Competitors. In addition, WFM Labs meetings are being recorded. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to be recorded. And finally, we ask that all participants review and comply with our code of conduct. Thank you.
Welcome, this is Ted Lango, and I'm joined today by Josh Wilkins and Jim Simmons. We're three of the founders of WFM Labs. Welcome to episode 3 of our weekly webinar series. Today, we'll present a draft of the new WFM maturity model. 2 weeks ago, we presented episode 1, an introduction to the WFM Labs community. In addition to presenting our mission, we gave an overview of WFM Labs, the initial resources we built. We presented our governance model and introduced you to the founding members. In week 2, last week, we discussed some of the drivers behind the need for change. The pandemic, exponential change in technology, independent workers, Gen Z. In summary, there's quite an increased level of business risk. And to address that business risk, we have a different model for supporting effective contact center operations. Coming up on March 9th, we're going to host a live session at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's an interactive workshop, and the topic on that is going to be sort of what we're previewing today. What does the next generation of workforce management look like? And we're leveraging a maturity model along with a maturity curve to facilitate that conversation. This is a draft that we're going to give a high-level overview of today and discuss between Josh, Jim, and myself. But this is a draft, and we encourage everyone to join us on March 9th, where we'll dig in, look for feedback, enhancements. Maybe we've got it completely wrong. I think we've got a good draft out here, but it's a powerful framework that we'd love to get input in from the community as a whole. So before we jump into the details, let's just actually wipe the slate clean here and talk about, what is a maturity model. I don't know, have either of the two of you guys used maturity models in your work in the past?
Yeah, I would say we definitely have. We tend to, in my past, I've often thought of it and referred to it as that roadmap, right? You're here today, where do you want to go? And I think most businesses do that, right? You try to look at that time frame and define it. I think what's interesting about your process is how you put those steps involved in it and really identify some of those critical goals that I feel like once you get maybe 6, 12, maybe 24 months out, it gets really hazy for people. So that's what I like about the idea of referring to it more as a maturity curve, more so than a roadmap.
Another benefit is you can use it to check against your progress. So 6 months in, you can look at your first bucket and understand how far have you gone. And it's even a good tool for, say, big companies that have advanced workforce management processes. Sometimes you have smaller groups that are still using the old school way, which we'll get into more. So even big companies can benefit from stuff like this.
Here, what we have on the y-axis is the value that ultimately we're delivering to an organization. So we like, the path to go up. As we go across on the x-axis, we have a couple of different dimensions we can think through. Certainly time is one of them. It takes time, to advance any model. In workforce management, we also see it as moving from reactive to proactive. And then it's also good just to say, hey, And depending on where you are on the maturity model, you're either an underperformer, a follower, maybe you're performing at par with industry, or maybe you're on the leading edge and outperforming or leading your industry and your practices. So that's just a very simple, X and Y view on it. Let's click into it and start discussing what we've drafted. The first level of it is really level 1 initial manual, no workforce management, Excel based. That's how I started in the industry. Is I started with a contact center that didn't have WFM software, leveraged Excel, kind of did everything in reaction, hired whenever we felt like that we were short on staff. I don't know, guys, if you've worked with companies in the past or transitioned anyone from Excel to what we'll call a little bit more modern day WFM software.
And I've been doing it 25 years. So yeah, I'm definitely, I'm not sure we were completely in the caveman days when I started, but definitely spent my fair share of time of leveraging Excel to get us to where we need to be. And it's interesting to see how the technology has advanced over that period.
Yeah, absolutely. What I found really interesting is some of the smaller groups, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, even they were using Excel to deal with workforce management until they get brought into the larger organization at, say, a bigger company. So even when I have all the tools, they have access to these things, maybe politics gets in the way, and then you still have to go through this even in 9,000 seat center.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Josh. I've seen that more recently. Well, I started my career a couple of decades ago in workforce. I started with a CLEC that actually just hadn't deployed a traditional WFM package integrated to the ACD. And so I lived through the generation of taking a few hundred seat center into having actual WFM software. But your point, I think, is probably more common today as companies acquire other companies, or they have segments of the company that may, just be doing their planning offline for whatever reason. As Josh said, might be political. Hey, we're doing our own thing over here on Excel. But it's a great example of describing, people who are at level 1. There's not necessarily an official forecast. We're still doing things on Excel and operating in that fashion. So we've position that as level 1. What comes after level 2 or level 1 is level 2. This is where you introduce your traditional workforce management software, whether it's IEX or Verint or Alvaria or Genesis, any of the many software packages that are out there. You've integrated those to the ACD, but you still have a number of things that I'll call in a traditional model. You've got fixed point budgets and capacity plans. You're pre-scheduling your activities, pre-scheduling coaching, pre-scheduling training. Quite often the environments are reactive in nature. You've got a limited framework for managing variance in real time. But with this, comes operating standards, and there's a wide area in level 2 where you may have practices in place, but you may not have best-in-class operating standards using that traditional workforce management software. This is where I feel like we've lived most of our lives in workforce management. If you guys have any insights into this level.
It's definitely my comfort zone where I spent most of my time, and that phrase you used earlier, we're going to do our own thing in Excel, is like a workforce management nightmare 101, right? So yeah, it's essentially getting people to understand the need for the change. I find is the biggest the impetus here. It's really getting those 4 or 5 people, the people who are going to adopt your change, to be champions, help them to get you to communicate it out across the organization, and then you can start actually implementing stuff that's going to come in level 3.
Yeah, and I think, Ted, it's interesting because you've certainly made progress as an organization from point A to point B, from level 1 to level 2, and you get into that sweet comfort zone where you feel okay and knowledgeable enough, and you have people who lean on that. Hey, I've been doing it. You find those couple superstars who bend and twist and make Excel do just the amazing things, and you can do it maybe a little bit more on the cheap, and you go, we're good. And I feel like this is where it's hard to get out of the current for organizations. Level 2 is probably the toughest part.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel the majority of companies are here today when we start to reframe this in a next generation framework. And it is difficult. You know, these are established practices. Many organizations spend a lot of time to get to the right side of level two. You know, maybe they don't have the documented standards and the procedures tuned as well. And once they do, hey, that's working well, you know, why go and change? But we'll keep moving to the right here. I do believe while this is what we're going to frame as traditional workforce management, we see additional capabilities leveraging modern day technology and new approaches to now go past traditional workforce management. And where we've positioned level three is where you start to attack, you know, that reactive real-time variance management framework, and you start to question, why are we pre-scheduling so much of what we do? This involves an automation investment that's different from our traditional WFM software packages, but it really looks at saying, hey, there's new ways that we can deliver training, that we can deliver coaching, you know, that we can automate things and play off of the natural variance that happens in every contact center. This automation is powerful in allowing us to provide far more support to agents. You know, we can trigger things with automation to let supervisors know that, hey, someone's struggling on a call or is hanging out in ACW too long. And there's also things we can question, like, you know, adherence management. Adherence is a metric long ground into call center agents and workforce teams over the years. You know, are there better ways to deal with adherence when calls run into breaks or lunches? So this is what we're envisioning as level three, is starting to go back and question the nature of pre-scheduling activities and really starting to lean on variance and capitalizing on variance so that we can, you know, harvest that time, really deliver additional support, training, coaching, and things to agents. Of course, this is a sweet spot for me. This is what kind of opened my eyes to, you know, what's possible to break out of the traditional WFM view. Again, Josh and Jim, any thoughts on this level? Anything that we're missing or that we should be thinking about as well when we start thinking about bringing automation into workforce management?
You know, Ted, I think one of the things that, and I'd be very interested to hear from others within our organization as we grow, is I've started to hear a lot more about CCaaS, right? Contact center as a service, and it's very interesting. And I think this is where you start seeing that come into play, right? So I can't think of anything to add, but I do think it brings a new flavor to level three and beyond. You know, as you start thinking about how do I incorporate, you know, digital and phone together, and you know, that sort of scenario where you have a customer on chat and you want to get them over to call. And so working through that and recognizing that as part of this curve, now that that has become a big point of discussion within the industry, I think is going to be important.
Really interesting point, Jim. I was actually going to ask you for a view on the other side. So that's very much enabling this to work from a technology perspective. And I was thinking more along the lines of hearts and minds and what I was talking about to make this change actually happen. So we've got the technology there, but what was your experience, and maybe even you, Ted, could add a bit of color too, getting the hearts and minds on board with these sorts of changes before you can start talking about that product mapping and technical routing and all that kind of stuff?
I think they're getting there, you know, and in the last webinar, we talked about those changes. I feel like certainly the pandemic shook things up. I think it was a bit of a long time coming, right? You kind of felt those murmurs. I would equate to a lot of what we're feeling in the call center is similar to, not the same as, but similar to what the restaurant industry is feeling, which is some of those workers got shaken up, and now they're rethinking things. And so I think, to answer your question, is hearts and minds are now looking at things a little bit differently. And, you know, Ted, you even mentioned it's at level three that you start thinking about those things, like is handle time a key metric? Is that schedule adherence, or where do we bring those folks along? And so I think it's the workforce that's telling us that, through the fact that they've started to attrite, and they go, you know what, working at home is a big game changer for me, but I'm rethinking what my work-life balance looks like. So I feel like we're kind of getting there, but there's still a way to go.
I think pandemic absolutely is a catalyst that has forced a lot of us to step back and evaluate. And companies now, I think, are starting to recognize that we really do need to rethink models, traditional models, and figure out the cost of attrition is extraordinary. And venturing into level 3, we can start to open the door on those conversations. So let's keep going to the right, level 4. It's great to introduce automation, but what does that do for us? Going back to level 2, on the far left-hand corner, we mentioned fixed point budgets and fragile capacity plans. And we feel like this is something that still is a problem for many, many organizations. We go through a plan, whether that plan is your annual budget, your 90-day forecast, or just looking at what's happening next week. We make these plans ahead of time, and we plan most often to a single point outcome. I need 662 headcount in 2024, or in April, or next week. And at the end of the day, we all know the moment that the rubber hits the road, our plan is off. So how do we go back and start to address a lot of the firefighting and the fragile nature that capacity plans have in many organizations? And we have a model outlined here that involves simulation, applying probability and variance factors to our planning, leveraging simulation to understand a range of possible outcomes, and understanding that, hey, we can actually present not just 662 headcount, but we're going to need between 620 and 680, depending on these variance factors, and ultimately build a more resilient capacity model, where we've also developed a framework for risk assessing those models. This is done across a lot of other functions where we take a variety of outcomes and we project how likely we are to be able to cover whatever that work is with the headcount that we have. Number of other things that we're thinking through is things like shrink segmentation. A lot of organizations just bucket shrinkage into one number, 32%, 38% shrink. Well, there's good shrink and there's bad shrink. We believe that we need to separate that out. Calibrating occupancy. A lot of organizations just run right against the wire and have cranked up occupancy so high that at the end of the day, again, variance introduces risk to our models. So beyond automation, we do believe there's another level in the next generation of workforce management that goes after solving this nature of fragile capacity plans.
The thing I love most about this is the risk assessed, right? And I think there's, I've used this concept to talk through, what do you put on paper as a plan versus what do you really do? And I've seen within organizations, there's always that variance, right? And it's accepted, when you look at what finance planned for versus what you actually spent, there's always that variance. We like it when it's under, but a lot of times it's over. And I think leveraging that and talking about what is that risk and how far are you willing as an organization to go out, is just a great concept. And I think, that to me is a point within this level 4 that I think can really help change some of those senior level hearts and minds and bring them along for this journey.
So this is level 4. But there's more past level 4, and what we're envisioning is a level 5 next generation workforce management that really puts the focus squarely on employees first. Attrition continues to be a huge problem for many contact centers, and ultimately it's just not sustainable going forward. It's getting harder and harder to recruit people. Calls are getting tougher and tougher. We need new talent, and we're really going to have to think about really all of our workforce management practices, and whether or not they're coming at solving the contact center's problem of high attrition with new practices that focus on employees first. We want to go back and question shift bids. Is that now out of date? And are there new approaches, especially with a resilient capacity plan and with automation, to hiring and onboarding people? Schedule quality index, SQI. Many of us run schedules as tight as we can by the interval. Do we need to re-examine some of that by building in a more resilient capacity plan and leveraging automation so that ultimately we're not running on the edge? And really at the end, we want to start to look at understanding why employees leave and turn from predicting purely the demand side to starting to forecast and understand when we're likely to have people trade out. Employee retention models, getting into things like predictive analytics for employee churn, I believe is the future for workforce management teams. We've spent 20, 30 years really honing in on volume and handle time and understanding what's coming in the front door. But many organizations I've worked with say, well, the employee left and we didn't know it was coming. We'd like to change that so that ultimately workforce management can start to signal and understand when we're likely to burn employees out, and then have effective practices that diffuse that and ultimately support the employees. What do you guys think about the employee first model? I know we've talked on the side, but at the end, to me, this is sort of the secret sauce, is putting the employees first has the power to really change things.
I think it's huge, right? We've talked about the reasons for that and what has changed dynamically within the world and the industry. I think what's interesting to me about this, and where I think, again, going back to the conversation in the workshop and where we have some opportunity to kind of put some polish on this, is I think organizations now are going to want to pick some of these bullets that you have and move them in. So the example here would be, if we want employee retention models, and we see that as a level 3, right? Or an organization says, can I do that before I get Monte Carlo simulations? So I think folks are going to look at this and say, I like this, this, and that, and I really want it earlier. And I do get a sense that folks are really starting to, across the industry, starting to think about those employee retention stuff. And so when you think about this curve and the individual points, how do you move those around? And specifically, how do we as an organization outline the output, right? You can move some of these little individual pieces around, but the goal of level 3 is this. The goal of level 4 is that. So you can bring employee retention maybe before Monte Carlo simulation. I can bring risk capacity plan, risk assessed capacity plan before maybe agent AHT assist, but I still want level 3 to work for me, right?
Totally agree. And I'm going to build off that, Jim, in some closing comments here, exactly what you said. How do you bring it in, and is there a logic to the order in this progression? Josh, any thoughts on level 5?
I really like the shift matching and gap recruiting side of things, like the Uber scheduling model, especially to your comments earlier, Ted, about people just reevaluating their life. I'm sorry, Jim, you were talking through that, but reevaluating their lives and work from home and work-life balance. Being able to have Uber type scheduling or something that's on demand, I think it's really critical for future, just to be able to staff for some of those gaps. And that kind of solves a part of that risk assessed capacity plan piece. If you have nimble capacity, it's kind of 2 birds with 1 stone.
I would add in as well, I think about level 5, but also just the model itself is, when and where and how do we as an organization go out and really look for, impress the industry players and technology and say, where do you fit in this, right? How do you as a technology help us get to this level? And I keyed off of, because I have heard and had discussions multiple about quote unquote Uber agent scheduling. And the definition is generally the same, And I've heard different technologies go, we do something like that, but that's one of the things I love about the concept of this organization is how do we raise that up and really start making sure they know that's what the industry needs, and how do we become a voice for the industry to make sure that those technologies are following our lead and we're not following the technology. Because the reality is that the world of the call center has a specific need, and that might not always align with the pricing models of the technology that exists today. And I do feel like that has to be a part of the discussion of this maturity curve.
Yeah, no, that's excellent, and make yourself a note. Be sure to bring that up in our workshop. Love to chat through and noodle on how we go after that. That's another great piece of insight that I think that we've got to build into the community, and one of our goals in terms of how we move the community forward. One of the to build up really both of your guys' comments, one of the things that we thought through when drafting this was just the order. No workforce management seems like a logical, place to start. And where we are today with traditional workforce management is a logical progression from just having no workforce management software. But some of the thought around this was real-time automation is a real enabler for risk assessed capacity planning. And we sat back and thought about this as, at the end of the day, why don't we have, a more resilient capacity plan? Why do we try to tune it down, to exactly 662 headcount? And that is because without automation, there's no way to tune down your plan in real time. Things happen too quickly. You need automation in order to go to finance and say, well, I can plan between 600 and 700 heads. I believe we need 680, even though the fine, sharpening the pencil says 662. By having a resilient plan, I essentially can leverage automation to tune it and optimize it by interval. And ultimately, Jim, I think to your comment around how do we bring, some of the employee attrition stuff further down into the curve, I do believe that organizations who migrate from level 2 into level 3 and start moving on recognize benefits around employee attrition. But I also see where not having a resilient capacity plan and burning agents out, going through those cycles where we're short-staffed, ultimately you've got to break through that to really, really say we're committed to focusing on an employee-first model itself. So that was some of our logic. Again, this is a draft, but some of our logic around the progression. We feel that this maturity model is sort of built where it's almost a prerequisite. Hey, you can't get to level 3, if you haven't gone through level 2 and you're still working from Excel. So get to level 2 if you're not there, get to level 3 if you're not there. Once you're at level 3, you've got a powerful lever to really go to finance and say there's different approaches to our capacity planning. And once you've got a resilient plan, now we can really double down on the commitment to the employee. Guys, I don't know if you have any closing comments. Those are like my thoughts and our overview. We wanted to give a little bit of a taste for the workshop coming up on March 9th, and how we transition from traditional workforce management to a next generation workforce management that really thinks about employees first, uses simulation and automation. Any thoughts for people before we close today from either of you about this maturity curve and joining us on March 9th?
I think it's great. I've said it before, Ted. You and I have talked offline, and I'm excited about it. And I put it in the perspective of the reality is, while technology has changed and everything, I'm often shocked by how little progress as an industry we've really made over the past 20 years, right? And so I think this is a chance to change that. And again, not that we don't have new technology and things of that nature, but when I look at and think about the fact that we're still heavily dependent on some of those static finance models, and AHT is a big deal, and all of the things that we just that's the way it's always been done and we still do it. And to think about really taking this maturity curve and making it an industry standard, I think that's very exciting, and hopefully others are as excited about it.
That's the word I would use too. I'm excited to hear how people approached a lot of these problems. Something interesting I always find talking with customers and just understanding how people work is everyone does things a little bit differently. And you can sometimes pull goodness out of places you didn't think that you had access to. So we might learn something along the way just as well.
Very good. Well, I'm excited about it as well. If you're watching this video, I hope you can join us on Thursday, March 9th, at 7 p.m. Eastern. We have a small community in WFM Labs. I'm also going out and after we post-produce this, going to get it out on LinkedIn to hopefully get more members into the community itself. And we look forward to debating, are these the right 5 levels? What else needs to be in there, like CCAS? Love to hear from everyone in the community about their thoughts on this model. Thank you both, gentlemen. I appreciate your time this morning. We'll hook up on March 9th and hopefully have a lively conversation on the topic.
Awesome. Thanks, Ted. Thanks,
All right,
Josh.
Thanks.